Leroy Lizotte had not moved in 17 minutes. The Alpha King stood in shadow near the eastern colonnade, champagne untouched in his hand, his focus fixed on a woman who didn't know she was being watched. She wore borrowed silk. He could tell by the way her fingers worried the hem, and her scent carried across the ballroom like wildfire through dry grass. "Fate," his wolf whispered. "Not yet," he answered. Ellen Tate didn't belong here. She knew it in the way her spine ached from holding herself too straight, in the careful placement of each step across marble that cost more than her childhood home. Sylvia Swinton's gown hung beautifully on her frame, but it wasn't hers. Nothing here was. The invitation had come through PAC Charity, a token gesture to the orphan daughter of a disgraced beta. She was decoration. A reminder of mercy. The grand hall blazed with 1,000 candles reflected in crystal that refracted light like weapons. Laughter rolled in waves across the crowd, sharp and excluding. Dora Ledger's PAC held the northern corner, their jewels catching light with every dismissive gesture. Travis Sherman's southern delegation owned the dance floor, their movements claiming territory. Music swelled from an orchestra that had played for kings. Everything gleamed. Everything judged. "Tell me," Jody Bradley's voice cut through the din, loud enough to carry. "Does she think that dress makes her one of us?" Ellen's breath caught. Jody stood 3 feet away, wine glass tilted in mock salute, her smile venomous. Beside her, Michael Lewis and James Anderson smirked in agreement. "I mean, we all appreciate charity cases, but there's a difference between attending and performing." Heat flooded Ellen's face. Around them, conversations dimmed. Eyes turned. "The gown's lovely," Jody continued, addressing the growing audience. "Sylvia always did have exquisite taste. Shame it's wasted on." The music stopped. Not gradually. Not a natural pause between movements. The violins choked mid-phrase. The cellos went silent. 300 people fell quiet in a cascading wave that started at the colonnade and swept through the hall like wind before a storm. Ellen felt the shift in air pressure before she understood it. Jody's smile faltered. Her wine glass trembled. Footsteps echoed across marble, measured, unhurried, absolute. The crowd parted without being asked. John Shirley, High Counsel to the throne, went pale and stepped back. Ira Brown, commander of the King's Guard, straightened to attention. Leroy Lizotte walked toward them. Not toward Jody. Toward Ellen. His eyes, molten gold, utterly focused, never left her face. Power rolled off him in waves that made wolves drop their gazes and strong men remember their place. He crossed the ballroom as if nothing else in it existed, each step rewriting every social rule that had governed the space moments before. Ellen couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The Alpha King stopped 1 foot away. And smiled. Chapter 2. Ellen's heartbeat was loud enough to drown out thought. Leroy Lizotte stood so close she could see gold flecks in his eyes, could feel heat radiating from his frame like standing too near a fire. The entire grand hall held its breath. 300 wolves waited for their king to speak, to explain why he'd crossed a ballroom for a nobody in borrowed silk. He didn't. Instead, he extended his hand, palm up, an invitation that somehow felt like a command. "Dance with me," he said. Not a question. His voice rolled through the silence, deep and certain, the kind of tone that made mountains move and wolves bow. But his eyes asked something different. Something that made her pulse stutter. Ellen's fingers trembled as she placed her hand in his. His palm was warm, calloused, impossibly gentle as it closed around hers. The contact sent electricity racing up her arm. Her wolf, quiet for so long she'd forgotten its voice, surged to sudden, startling life. Mate. No. The thought was absurd. Impossible. Alpha Kings didn't have fated mates from disgraced bloodlines. They chose from powerful families, strategic alliances, women who belonged in crystal ballrooms instead of surviving on their edges. But Leroy was already leading her toward the dance floor, and the crowd parted like he was Moses and they were the sea. Behind them, Jody Bradley looked like she might shatter. The orchestra started again, a waltz, slow and sweeping. Leroy's hand settled at Ellen's waist, possessive and sure, and suddenly they were moving. He led with the kind of natural dominance that made following effortless, each step perfectly timed, his body guiding her through turns she didn't know she could make. "You're shaking," he murmured. "You're the Alpha King," she whispered back, as if that explained everything. It did. "Leroy," he corrected. His thumb traced a small circle against her waist, the gesture intimate enough to make her breath catch. "And you are Ellen Tate, daughter of Marcus, who died with honor regardless of what they say." She looked up sharply. "You know who I am?" His smile was slight, dangerous. "I know everything that matters in my territory." They turned, and she caught glimpses of the watching crowd, Sylvia Swinton's shocked expression, Travis Sherman's calculating gaze, Dora Ledger whispering furiously to Michael Lewis. John Shirley stood rigid near the throne, his face carefully blank. Only Ira Brown looked unsurprised, his stance relaxed, as if he'd been expecting exactly this. "They're staring," Ellen said. "Let them." Leroy pulled her infinitesimally closer, close enough that propriety became a suggestion instead of a rule. "Do you know what they see when they look at you now? A charity case in a borrowed dress." "No." His voice dropped lower, intimate and absolute. "They see the woman I chose to dance with. The woman I stopped a ball for. The woman standing in the only place that matters in this room." "Where's that?" His eyes blazed gold. "In my arms." Chapter 3. The waltz ended, but Leroy didn't release her. His hand remained at Ellen's waist, possessive and warm, while the final notes faded into charged silence. The orchestra waited. The crowd waited. The entire world seemed to pause on the edge of whatever came next. "Walk with me," Leroy said, and this time it was a command. He guided her toward the terrace, his palm steady at the small of her back. Wolves scattered from their path like leaves before wind. Ellen caught Travis Sherman's narrowed eyes, saw Jody Bradley's face twist with something ugly, felt the weight of 300 stares burning against her shoulders. Then they were through the doors, and cool night air hit her heated skin. The terrace overlooked the northern forest, vast and dark beneath a half-moon. Music drifted through the open doorway behind them, but softer now, distant. Leroy released her only to shrug out of his jacket, midnight blue silk worth more than she'd earn in a year, and drape it across her shoulders. "I'm fine," she protested. "You're freezing." His fingers lingered on her collarbone as he adjusted the jacket, the touch sending shivers that had nothing to do with temperature. "And lying pearly." Ellen pulled the jacket tighter, surrounded by his scent, cedar and smoke, and something wild that made her wolf whine. "Why did you do that?" "Dance with you. All of it." She turned to face him fully. "You're the Alpha King. You could have any woman in that room. You could have." "I could have ignored what Jody said," Leroy interrupted quietly. "I could have let her humiliate you and done nothing." His jaw tightened. "Is that what you think I should have done?" "I think you just made me the most hated woman in the territory." "You were already hated." The bluntness should have stung, but his voice was gentle. "They hate what they can't control, what they can't predict." He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. "They hate that you survived what should have destroyed you. My father was accused by cowards and condemned by politics." Leroy's eyes flashed gold. "I was 17 when they executed him. Too young to stop it. Old enough to remember." The admission hit like a physical blow. "You knew." "I knew the evidence was convenient. I knew the timing served Travis Sherman's ambitions." His voice went hard. "I knew that 10 years later, I'm still finding proof that your father died for someone else's treason." Ellen's world tilted. "What?" But Leroy was already reaching for her, his hand cupping her face with devastating gentleness. "You asked why I did this. Why I crossed that ballroom. Why I'm standing here instead of inside playing their games." "Yes." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Because the moment you walked into my territory 3 months ago, my wolf recognized what my crown has denied me for 10 years. Her breath stopped. "What?" Leroy smiled, wild, certain, irreversible. Home. Chapter 4. Ellen stepped back, and Leroy let her go. The absence of his touch felt like cold water, shocking and clarifying. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossibility of his words with the absolute certainty in his eyes. Home. He'd called her home. Alpha kings didn't talk like that, didn't feel like that, about orphaned she-wolves with disgraced bloodlines. You don't know me, she said. I know enough. You know nothing. Her voice cracked despite her best effort. You know a name and a tragedy. You know what you've observed from whatever shadows you've been watching from. That's not knowing someone. Leroy tilted his head, studying her with unnerving focus. You're right. The agreement surprised her into silence. I don't know your favorite season or what makes you laugh, he continued, moving closer with predatory grace. I don't know if you prefer coffee or tea, if you sleep on your left side or your right, what you dream about when the nightmares finally let you rest. Each word landed like a touch. Ellen's back hit the terrace railing. But I know you've been working doubles at the Riverside Clinic to pay for a degree they won't let you finish because of your father's name. His voice dropped lower, intimate and devastating. I know you give half your earnings to Sylvia Swinton for a room the size of a closet and never complain. I know you haven't shifted in 6 months because you're terrified your wolf will be too broken to come back. Tears burned hot behind her eyes. Stop. I know that 3 months ago, you stood in the rain outside my territory borders for 20 minutes before crossing because you'd promised yourself you'd never ask this pack for anything again. He was close enough now that she could feel his breath against her forehead. And I know that the moment you finally stepped across that line, every instinct I possess screamed mine. That's not possible. It's not convenient, Leroy corrected. There's a difference. Inside, the music shifted to something faster, celebratory. Laughter erupted, normal, careless sounds of people who belonged. Out here, the night pressed close and the Alpha King looked at her like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. Your council will never accept this, Ellen whispered. My council serves at my pleasure. The pack. The pack follows strength. His hand rose, hovering near her face but not touching, giving her the choice. And there is nothing stronger than a king who's found his queen. The title detonated between them like a bomb. I'm not, Ellen couldn't finish the sentence. Not yet, Leroy agreed. His smile was soft, patient, terrifying in its certainty. But you will be. Because I'm going to prove what your father died protecting. I'm going to give you back your name. And then, Ellen Tate, I'm going to ask you properly. Behind them, the terrace doors opened. John Shirley's voice cut through the night, formal and cold. Your Majesty. We have a problem. Chapter 5. Leroy's expression didn't change, but Ellen felt the shift in him, predator to king in a heartbeat. Define problem, he said, not turning from her. John Shirley stepped onto the terrace, his ceremonial robes catching moonlight. Behind him, Ira Brown's hand rested on his sword hilt, his weathered face carefully neutral. The High Counselor's gaze flickered to Ellen, then away, dismissive. Travis Sherman has called for an emergency council session. John's voice carried the particular dryness of a man delivering news he knew would be refused. Regarding tonight's display. Display. Leroy repeated the word like it tasted rotten. His exact words were unprecedented breach of protocol. John clasped his hands behind his back. He has Michael Lewis, James Anderson, and Dora Ledger's support. They're invoking Article 7. Ellen's stomach dropped. Even she knew Article 7, the provision allowing council to question royal decisions that threatened pack stability. Interesting. Leroy's voice went soft, dangerous. And what, precisely, threatens pack stability? A dance? A conversation? You publicly claimed. John stopped, recalibrated. Your Majesty's attention toward Miss Tate has created speculation. Speculation. Leroy smiled without humor. Is that what we're calling truth now? The High Counselor's jaw tightened. Her father was innocent. The words dropped like stones into still water. John went rigid. Behind him, Ira's expression flickered, something that might have been satisfaction, before smoothing back to neutral. Inside the ballroom, music continued, oblivious. That's a serious accusation, John said carefully. It's a fact. Leroy finally turned, his body angling to keep Ellen behind him, protective, possessive. I have evidence. Names. Dates. Financial records that prove Marcus Tate was framed for treason he didn't commit. Then why not present it? Because the man who orchestrated his execution sits on my council. Leroy's voice cut like a blade. And has for 10 years, believing himself safe. Silence crashed over the terrace. Ellen couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the rushing in her ears. Evidence. Her father was innocent. She'd always believed it, hoped it, but believing and knowing were different countries entirely. You're accusing. John's face had gone pale. I'm stating facts. Leroy stepped forward, and the High Counselor retreated instinctively. Tell Travis his emergency session is granted. Tomorrow. Noon. Full council attendance mandatory. His smile turned predatory. I believe it's time we discuss stability. John opened his mouth, closed it, finally nodded stiffly. Your Majesty. He retreated inside. Ira remained, his scarred face unreadable. The south wing is secure, the commander said quietly. I've positioned my most trusted men. Good. Leroy glanced back at Ellen. Have Sylvia Swinton's rooms guarded as well? Discreetly. Ira's eyebrow rose fractionally. Expecting trouble? Preventing it. The old warrior's smile was brief, fierce. As you command, my king. He left them alone again. The night felt heavier now, weighted with revelation and danger. Leroy turned to Ellen, his expression softening. I meant what I said. All of it. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. Chapter 6. Sleep didn't come. Ellen lay in Sylvia's guest room, her room, technically, though 6 months hadn't made it feel less borrowed, and stared at ceiling shadows cast by moonlight. Outside her door, she'd heard the subtle shift of boots an hour ago. Ira's guards, discreet as promised, but present. Protecting her. Because the Alpha King had commanded it. Because he'd called her home. Because tomorrow he would prove her father died innocent, and the world she'd learned to survive in would shatter completely. She pressed her palms against her eyes, but couldn't unsee Leroy's expression when he'd said it. That absolute certainty. That wild, impossible conviction that she was somehow meant for him, meant for a crown she had no business touching. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. Ellen froze. Yes, it's Sylvia. She opened the door to find her landlady, her only real friend in this pack, holding 2 cups of tea, her elegant face creased with concern. Sylvia Swinton had taken her in when no one else would, asked no questions, demanded no gratitude. You're awake, Sylvia said unnecessarily. Can't imagine why. Ellen accepted the tea, let her inside. They sat on the narrow bed, silence stretching comfortable and familiar between them. Sylvia had perfected the art of being present without pushing, a kindness Ellen hadn't known she needed until she'd found it. He danced with you, Sylvia finally said. He did more than that. Ellen's hands trembled around the warm cup. Sylvia, he says he has evidence. About my father. He says someone on the council. Travis Sherman. Ellen's head snapped up. You knew. I suspected. Sylvia's voice was careful, controlled. Marcus was your father's name, yes. But he was also someone I knew. Before. The pause spoke volumes. You knew my father? Ellen whispered. We were friends. Close friends. Sylvia stared into her tea like it held answers. When he was accused, I didn't have proof. Just instinct. Just the certainty that Marcus Tate would never betray his pack. Her voice hardened. Travis had just lost the vote for head counselor. 3 weeks later, Marcus was arrested. The new head counselor, John Shirley, was Travis's closest ally. The pieces assembled themselves into an ugly picture. Why didn't you say anything? To who? Sylvia's laugh was bitter. I was nobody. Am nobody. The widow of a minor pack official with no power and less credibility. She met Ellen's eyes. But you're not nobody. Not anymore. I didn't ask for this. No one asks for destiny. Sylvia set down her cup, took Ellen's hands. But Leroy isn't playing games. If he's moving against Travis, he's been planning this for years. And if he's claimed you publicly. She squeezed gently. You're either the safest woman in this territory or the most endangered. Which do you think? Sylvia's smile was sad, knowing. Both. Outside, a wolf howled long, mournful, distant. Another answered. The pack, restless in the dark. Tomorrow, council would convene. Tomorrow, truth would demand its reckoning. Tonight, Ellen sat with the only person who'd ever chosen to see her and tried to believe she could survive what came next. Chapter 7. The council chamber was built to intimidate. Ellen stood in the gallery, the only place she was permitted, and felt the weight of stone and history pressing down like physical force. Vaulted ceilings soared 40 feet overhead, carved with the names of every Alpha King since the Pack's founding. 7 high-backed chairs formed a semicircle on the marble floor below, each occupied by a council member whose collective authority could challenge even a king. Almost. Leroy sat alone on the raised dais, perfectly still, a predator wearing a crown. The gallery was packed. Sylvia sat to Ellen's left, her presence steady and grounding. To her right, she recognized faces from the ball: Jody Bradley, smug and expectant, Dora Ledger, whispering behind her hand, others whose names she didn't know but whose hostility needed no introduction. They'd come for a spectacle. They'd come to watch her fall. "This session is called to order," John Shirley announced, his voice echoing off stone. "Council convenes at the request of Councillor Travis Sherman, invoking Article 7 regarding matters of pack stability." Travis rose, tall, silver-haired, radiating the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences. "Your Majesty, honored council, I come before you with concerns shared by many." His gaze swept the chamber, calculated and cold. "Last night, our king showed unprecedented favor to a woman of questionable lineage." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. "Ellen Tate," Travis continued, "daughter of Marcus Tate, executed traitor." "Innocent man." Leroy's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Silence crashed down. Travis's smile faltered. "Your Majesty, with respect, Marcus Tate was tried and convicted by this council." Leroy stood, and the movement commanded absolute attention. "By you, specifically, Councillor Sherman. You presented the evidence. You demanded execution. You convinced every person in this room that Marcus Tate sold pack secrets to our enemies. Because he did. He didn't." Leroy descended from the dais, each step deliberate. "Ira, the records." The commander emerged from the shadows carrying a leather case. He placed it on the central table with a heavy thud, then stepped back, his scarred face impassive. Leroy opened the case. Financial transfers from the Silver Creek Pack to a numbered account. 3 payments. 20,000, 30,000, 50,000. He pulled out documents, laying them across the table. The account used as evidence of Marcus's treason. Travis had gone very still. "Interesting account," Leroy continued softly. "Opened 6 months before the first payment. Closed 3 days after Marcus's execution." He looked up, gold eyes blazing. "By you, Travis. Your signature. Your authorization." The gallery erupted. "That's..." Travis lunged forward. "Forgery. Lies. Bank records don't lie." Leroy's voice carried over the chaos. "Neither do witnesses. Michael, would you like to explain why you accompanied Travis to Silver Creek the week before Marcus's arrest? Or shall I present the testimony from the banker who processed these transactions?" Michael Lewis had gone white as bone. John Shirley stood slowly, staring at the documents like they might burn him. "Impossible," Travis whispered. Leroy smiled, cold, victorious, final. "No, just overdue." Chapter 8. The chamber descended into chaos. Wolves surged to their feet in the gallery, voices rising in shock and fury. Jody Bradley clutched Dora Ledger's arm, both women staring at the documents scattered across the council table like they were venomous snakes. James Anderson backed toward the door, his face ashen. Travis Sherman stood frozen, his silver hair disheveled, his carefully constructed authority crumbling in real time. "Order." John Shirley's voice cracked across the room. "I demand order." But Leroy wasn't finished. "Michael Lewis." The Alpha King's voice cut through the noise like a whip. "Step forward." The younger counselor didn't move. His hands trembled at his sides, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chamber's chill. "Now." Michael stumbled forward as if pulled by invisible strings. Ira moved to flank him, casual but unmistakably a threat. Tell them, Leroy said quietly. Tell them what Travis promised you in exchange for corroborating his evidence. I can't. Head counselor position. Leroy answered for him. After Travis assumed it from John. A position you were promised 10 years ago and never received. His smile was merciless. Because Travis never intended to share power. He just needed someone disposable. Someone who'd testify that they'd seen Marcus meeting with Silver Creek contacts. Your Majesty, please, Michael's voice broke. Did you see Marcus commit treason? Silence stretched impossibly long. No, Michael whispered. The gallery exploded again. Ellen gripped the railing, her knuckles white, her heart thundering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Sylvia's hand found hers, squeezing tight. Lies. Travis roared. He's been coerced. The king has manipulated. The king, Leroy interrupted, his voice dropping to something deadly soft, has spent 10 years gathering irrefutable evidence while you slept soundly, believing yourself untouchable. He moved closer to Travis, predatory and precise. You framed an innocent man. Convinced this council to execute him. Destroyed his family. And for what? Political advancement? Revenge because Marcus questioned your ambitions. Travis's face twisted with rage. He was weak. He would have undermined everything I built. The admission hung in the air like a confession. John Shirley sank into his chair, head in his hands. Dora Ledger looked ill. Even James Anderson had stopped retreating, staring at Travis with dawning horror. Guards, Leroy said calmly. For wolves in royal armor materialized from the chamber's alcoves. They surrounded Travis with military efficiency. Travis Sherman, you are hereby stripped of your council seat and charged with treason, conspiracy, and murder. Leroy's voice carried absolute authority. You will be held in the Northern Tower pending trial. You can't do this. Travis struggled as guards seized his arms. The council, John Shirley said hoarsely, rising slowly, cannot protect a traitor. His face was gray, aged a decade in minutes. Even one we should have seen clearly. Travis was dragged toward the doors, still shouting, his denials dissolving into incoherent rage. The chamber fell silent in his wake. Leroy turned, his gaze rising to the gallery. To Ellen. Your father, he said clearly, died an innocent man. Chapter 9. Ellen couldn't move. The entire council chamber watched her, hundreds of eyes fixed on the orphan daughter who'd just been vindicated by a king. The weight of their attention was suffocating, but she couldn't look away from Leroy, who stood in the center of the marble floor like he'd just rewritten the world and was waiting to see if she'd accept it. Miss Tate. John Shirley's voice was subdued, haunted. On behalf of this council, I offer our most sincere. No. The word came from somewhere deep, somewhere raw. Ellen descended the gallery steps, vaguely aware of Sylvia's hand releasing hers, of the crowd parting as she moved. She stopped at the gallery's edge, the barrier between observation and participation. Apologies don't return the dead, she said quietly. They don't erase 10 years of shame. They don't restore what was stolen. John flinched, but didn't look away. You're right. I know I am. Ellen's hands shook, so she gripped the railing harder. My father served this pack with honor. He died believing he'd failed it. He died without knowing I'd survive to hear the truth. Her voice cracked. So no, counselor. I don't accept your apology. Silence pressed down like a physical thing. Then Leroy moved. He crossed to the barrier, stopped directly before her, close enough that only she could hear when he spoke. What do you accept? He asked softly. Everything. Nothing. The truth that her father died innocent. The impossibility of a king who'd spent a decade preparing justice for a woman he'd never met. The terrifying knowledge that her entire life had just fractured along new fault lines. I don't know, she whispered. That's fair. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her jaw, gentle, reverent, devastating. But you know what I'm offering. A crown I don't want. Justice you deserve. His thumb traced her cheekbone. And a future where you're not defined by what they took from you. Leroy, I'm not asking you to decide now. His smile was soft, patient, certain. I'm asking you to let me prove that everything I said last night was true. That you're home. That you're mine. That we're inevitable." The gallery held its collective breath. Ellen looked at him, this impossible king who'd stopped a ball, defied a council, and dismantled a decade-old conspiracy because he'd recognized something in her that she'd forgotten to recognize in herself. "Worth. One condition," she said. His eyebrow rose. "You let me help finish this. The trial. Whatever comes next." Her voice steadied. "I'm not a spectator in my own life anymore." Leroy's smile blazed like the sun. "Deal." He vaulted the barrier in one fluid motion, landed beside her, and offered his hand. This time, when Ellen took it, she didn't tremble. Epilogue. 3 months later. The coronation was smaller than tradition demanded. Ellen had insisted no grand spectacle, no performances of power she hadn't earned. Just the council, the inner pack, and witnesses who mattered. Sylvia stood in the front row, crying quietly. Leroy placed the silver circlet on her head himself, his hands steady, his eyes bright with something that looked like joy. "My queen," he whispered. "My king," she answered. And meant it. The end.